I'm the Chief Customer Officer at HackerRank, and I'm really excited to be moderating this discussion. I, of course, get to do the easy part, which is just ask questions. And the real insights you'll be getting from Prabhita and Aubrey on how to build engineering teams that are both diverse and inclusive. So love to start. Let's start with Prabhita. Tell us more about yourself and what you're doing today.
Hey, hi all. I work at Box. I run the platform infrastructure team. So folks who do not know what Box does, we are more than storage of content. We actually do collaboration and workflow automation just for the management of content. So my team, the focus of my team, though I say I'm the director of platform infrastructure, to just put the focus around it, it's basically automating anything to do with infrastructure to abstract infrastructure from developers.
Cool. Aubrey?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Airtable. If you don't know what Airtable does, we are a spreadsheet-like database that you can build applications on top of. And our mission is to truly democratize software creation. So if you're non-technical and would like to build an app or a workflow, it's very, very easy for you to do that on our platform. And my day-to-day looks like working with folks like Prabhita to diversify their teams, understand why inclusion is important, and really put the pedal to the metal in terms of getting out to as many underrepresented engineers as possible. So super excited to share what we're doing at Airtable.
That's awesome. We started using Airtable at HackerRank. It's actually started by the marketing team. And then from there, we learned about it. And then Box is something I brought in for the customer success team. And now from there, it's actually now embedded in our product too. So it's exciting to meet both of you and share sort of how we use both your products. So for those of you that don't know about HackerRank, I'm doing the branding up here as I've been told by my marketing team. We match developers with great companies. We're a market-leading technical interview platform to identify and hire developers with the right skills. We're also a community of about 11 million developers that use HackerRank to practice coding skills, prepare for interviews, and eventually get hired. So that's all about us. But let's jump in. Let's start with a little bit of where does the journey start on diversity and inclusion, especially here in the Valley, right? It was Tracy Chow, for those of you who go look her up. She asked a very big question in 2013 while attending Grace Hopper, the Celebration for Women in Computing. And the question she asked is, where are the numbers? And that sort of led into what's become her sort of journey. And she's been championing this around all of us in tech recruiting, hiring managers, recruiters. We've added diversity and inclusion to our sort of hiring checklist. And Atlassian is someone that we worked with very closely over the years. They did a state of diversity and inclusion tech survey. It was a few years ago. And it was interesting to find that 80% of the respondents, they believe that diversity and inclusion are important. But over the years, what we're seeing is there's a dip in the number of organizations that actually have a formal D&I program. It used to be 55%, it's down to 45 just in a year alone. And one of the things that the team at Atlassian that was being led by Aubrey Blanche at that time was one of the things they really questioned was, is there diversity fatigue happening within us, especially in the tech world, right? And it's a really important question. Given how this is changing, how important it needs to be, but it's starting to decline in a year. Or let's start with you. What are your thoughts on the data? Do you agree, disagree? And share with us, more importantly, what are you driving at Airtable in the field of D&I?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for going into the history of diversity and inclusion in the Valley. And just to add a little bit more context, I think between Tracy Chow and Aubrey Blanche, there was Jesse Jackson, who went to Google and all the big companies in 2014 and say, hey, where are your diversity numbers? And he was really the person who actually bought stock in those companies so that he could go to their shareholder meetings and say, do this. So I think that he was a huge advocate and someone who accelerated the momentum that Tracy Chow kind of sparked. So, since then, I think the conversation around diversity and inclusion has evolved a bunch. We've added words like belonging, balance, coined by Aubrey Blanche. Equity is now put in there, and more social justice related concepts. I'd say, 2 years ago, there was definitely some fatigue around it. Just because the conversation hadn't evolved. To put it in context, though, I mean, even in tech, you have fatigue around component libraries, or using Angular versus React, and now you see kind of React moving, everyone moving towards React, and I assume there will probably be some fatigue there as well. So I see that fatigue more as an evolution of the language rather than a fatigue of actually doing the work. Because if you do, as I kind of dug into that data, I realized that Aubrey also expanded her data set to include startups, and those startups didn't have anybody doing diversity and inclusion work. So of course, I think the numbers would drop over time. So I think that's something else contextual that I want to add there. And then to kind of bundle it up, Airtable is one of the only startups that I know that has less than 300 employees and has somebody leading diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, someone asked, what's the single action you take that's made the most impact on diversity or inclusion? I think hiring someone to do the job is the number one thing that you can do. Having someone who owns it, who's the lighthouse, who puts 40 hours a week towards making it happen and keeping people accountable is the number one action you can do to make sure that you have long-term success.
That's awesome. I think that's very, very powerful and insightful. And I think it's a watermark that the rest of us that are sort of early startups, you're absolutely right. Like, wow, we don't have anyone that's dedicated, like you said. And yeah, 40 hours is a no one, you're not working 40 hours, no one does anymore. But the fact that you wake up every morning thinking about this deeply, and this is all you're focused on, and helping drive the other 299 folks at Airtable instead of championing this is huge. That's great. Pravita, let's talk about Box. This is an area at Box that Aaron has been very passionate about right from the beginning. He's driven it himself, and it permeates throughout the company, and it's very, very apparent. You've been very transparent about your efforts. You go to the Box website, there's an entire section dedicated. You've been sharing progress, good, bad, how well you've been doing, and that's phenomenal. Like, it's usually it's hidden. We know about it, but we don't want to talk about it, at least publicly, unless asked. Box Women Network and Women in Technology are initiatives that you're very much part of. You actually started Women in Technology Ops. Share with us more about that program and what is the motivation? How is it going? Tell us more about those type of programs that you're running.
Yeah, so for me, I think coming from the technology side, basically coming from other companies as well, I've seen the Women in Technology Forum that tends to be a platform where women get together, we talk about the empowerment, the enablement, and the support aspect of it. But Box is the first company that I actually come across that actually spoke about Box Women Network. It was basically bringing all the women within Box. It started out as, if I remember correctly, I think it started as a grassroots movement, just basically a bunch of women joining together. And now it is basically a leadership sponsored platform. Okay. For me, when I joined Box 3 years ago, I pivoted from the software development into technical operations. This was my first time into technical operations. And one thing that I did notice, which was just to my face, was when I joined, there were about 8 women. Okay. And what I did find is the 8 women, there were few that were more vocal, who have been there for some time. The others were pretty silent, there was quietness about them, though they were active and everything. And basically what I did find out is, because the minority in an organization of 120 to 150, you have 8 women, it tends to be very unique in the fact that, you sort of get left behind. So, thinking about this, what prompted me to get started with Women in Technology focused just on operations. Again, this started with not so much as, as any type of employee resource group. It started as just for us to get together, just talk about what are the challenges for women within technical operations. So currently we have 23 women in the organization. Okay, so that is a big swing for us. That again was a very intentional swing that I think there was another question on the chat that spoke about it, where we basically identified, hey, these are the gaps and this is what we need to do. And it was an intentional investment by leadership to move that way. So I'm very passionate about this. It's basically, again, it is not so much about hiring more women, but making sure there's more inclusiveness of the women who are there. We don't lose the women who are there. So that was the goal of that platform that I started.
That's awesome. That's really insightful, and thank you for sharing that. I believe building diversity in tech and creating an atmosphere of balance and belonging, it's hard, but it is possible, right?
Yes.
At HackerRank, we believe the first step is redesigning your hiring process, right? Our brain is sort of naturally biased. Or you were sharing with me some research before that you've done. Like, we spend all of 16 seconds on a resume and make a decision, right? So 16 seconds, that's fast, right? It's like you said, there's only so many data points that you can process in 16 seconds. And so I think it's really important that we as recruiters, as hiring managers, those that do interviews, whether it's peer interviews, as part of the whole hiring process, we need to be aware of these biases and prevent them from sneaking into the whole process that we have, whether it's I'm looking at a resume, I'm I'm looking at someone's skills assessment, I've given them an assessment that you could use HackerRank for, I'm doing an interview. There's so many things that just naturally creep into our head, and we have to be really, really aware of it. Most times we're not even aware that we've created a bias, right? Yeah. And there's 5 things that I've learned working with Aubrey when she was the global head of diversity and belonging at Atlassian, and she's now at Culture Ramp. And some of these are very provocative. We're big believers in it, but we'll go through all of those, and I'd love to get your reaction on it, right? But they're so deeply ingrained in our process, which is why I call them really provocative. So the first being, skip the resume completely. Like, are we ready to make that bold step and say, you know what, resumes don't matter because of the fact that we spend such little time on it and make these judgments based on what we see. They are a marketing tool, right? You can get someone to write a really well-written resume, and does that bias us based on the words that are being used, how it's presented, etc.? Should we just kill the resume completely and just focus on skills? And more important, can we just obfuscate any information about the candidate, right? No name, no email address, and that can create a bias. And I'll give you an example. If I'm applying for a job, I'll be using my personal email address, right? So it's gaurav.varma@gmail.com. I got onto Gmail early, so I could get that. There's plenty of Gaurav Varmas out there. But you can infer a lot just by my email address. Male, Indian origin, you can go look it up. Things that I shouldn't be doing on the internet are all out there tied to my email address. And so there's a lot you can infer to and make a judgment or make a decision on whether you want me to move ahead or not, or it'll impact sort of as we go through this process. So could we kill all of that and say, it doesn't matter who I am, it doesn't matter where I come from, my background doesn't matter. If I've got the skills, that's what puts me into your process, and that's all you should be assessing, right? And the skills are both tech skills and soft skills, and I have to be presentable, and I have to be able to hold a conversation, and I should be collaborative, is just as important as, can I code? Do I have language proficiency? Do I know React? Do I know Angular? Do I know how to do good code reviews? Can I debug? All those things make me as a person more than just my resume. So that's number one. And I know that's the most provocative and the most controversial. So a lot of us are not ready to skip the resume, but we should at least consider the whole story, right? And who am I and what am I and what do I bring to the table is the whole story versus which school I went to, what was my GPA, which company did I work at before. I think more important is, what did I actually achieve? What were my outcomes? What was my impact on the company I worked for? The name of the company, the size of the company really shouldn't matter, right? Are they a marquee brand or not? Really shouldn't make a difference. The third one is, do we kill the concept of culture fit? We're so ingrained with doing a culture fit, but it does create a lot of bias, and we'll talk about some more of that. But that's another one, is how do you really use the culture fit interview and the idea of culture fit and make sure that it doesn't bring bias into our decisions. The fourth sort of thing that we've come up with that's really worth considering is, we've really got to get engaged, and the engagement has to come with us really starting to attend meetups and different sort of forums where we connect with individuals from different backgrounds versus going to the same place over and over again, which is where we tend to go to. It's sort of the alumni where I went to school and all of those meetups. It tends to have groupthink. We've all studied together, same courses, same professors. It tends to bring a groupthink, and I think it's really important that we open the aperture and really start hanging out or attending, being part of meetups, being part of different groups that come from different backgrounds. Really start engaging versus only engaging within sort of our group that we've always been with. Hard to do, but not impossible at all, right? And then the fifth one, which is where I want to spend some time on because it's so much of a sourcing sort of strategy, is referrals. We ask everyone in our companies, all employees for all roles, to say, consider people in your circle. We have bonuses, spiff programs for, hey, go get some referrals. And if they get hired, I've seen anywhere from $5,000 to $1,000 to, anywhere in between. They're the lifeline of how we do recruiting, especially in tech, especially here in the Valley, right? And I've seen this across the board, but in tech, this is so deeply ingrained. It's the most popular and the most vibrant source of candidates for tech. And some say it can spur a lack of diversity, since most people, you refer someone that you liked, you worked with before, you went to school with before, you wouldn't refer someone that you don't know, right? So the thinking is the same, and there is alignment and there's value to it, but does it actually create does it limit our ability to have diversity? You want people coming with different thought process, different ways to think, different ways to problem solve, versus everyone looking at the problem in the same way. Let's start with you, Aubrey. Your thoughts on referrals and how do you combat bias that come with referrals?
Yeah, great question. I think, if I were to stack rank the most important things to solve for that you just said, I think it would go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Starting, as you said, with referrals. I think referrals are an easy way to recruit, and they definitely don't beget diversity. I mean, if we all took 10 seconds to write down the 10 people that we trusted, just in our circle, professionals that we trust to do a great job, and then wrote down their race and their gender, I'm sure it would look very similar to the people that we are or that we know. And that wouldn't be a very diverse group of folks, right? I think the referrals also kind of beget this challenging notion that if you were in tech first, you're probably better for a job. If I started in tech 30 years ago or 10 years ago, then I'm probably going to be a lot more well-connected in tech. And it's going to be easy for me to get referrals into these organizations, whereas folks who are historically breaking in, it's going to be hard. So, one thing that we definitely have referrals, and it's a challenge, but we make sure that one thing that we're doing is we are essentially saying, like, if a referral is coming into the pipeline, we are also going to do as much work to source candidates outside of our network to kind of compete with that person. And it's for two reasons. One, we should be challenging ourselves to look outside of our network. One thing that I think that you said that makes a lot of sense and is important to us is, especially as we're starting, we don't want people who have the same mindset. Because at the end of the day, we want folks who have competing mindsets that can sharpen each other's ideas. It's our job to, as someone is coming in, have them compete with another person who is just as talented, that we vetted in a way to make sure that they're above the bar, and to really parse out, like, is this person the best, or is this person a friend of our network, right? So I think that referrals are both a great way to find talent that can fit in easily. But I also think that it leaves a lot of talent on the table if you only truly rely on that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on referrals.
That's awesome. I totally agree with you. I think you definitely want to sort of give them white glove, because after all, they're a referral from someone who's already working here. They put their reputation, their sort of social capital out there to bring someone in. So you definitely want to treat them with that respect. But to your point of, let's neutralize the ground, right? And say, yeah, but we're going to put you through a similar process, so it's equal. And at the end of the day, the skills will tell whether I make you the offer or someone else that is coming in through, not coming through a referral, right? And that's great. Just making it a level playing field. That's awesome.
One
Ravita,
other.
your thoughts on killing resumes? Go ahead, Albert.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I can jump in afterwards.
Yeah, cool. Pravita, your thoughts on killing resumes and culture fit interviews? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier this week. Are we ready for those kind of changes?
I know, the first time we spoke about it, I was like, what? This is not going to work because this is the norm, right? I can think. And then, after our conversation, I thought about it and I said, what it is? Resumes always tell me what this person is. It never tells me who they are. It talks to me about, what have they accomplished? In fact, it also, to some extent, from the school they come from, it talks about the social economic aspect where they're raised. You can actually go that far because I really, I had to spend some time based on our last conversation. And I'm completely with you. I like the blind hiring, because, I am not the sheet of paper, because if I had to write my history and my accomplishments, that single, and I know we want 2 pages, we want 3 pages, I can't even write a book. Okay, because there's so many intersections and so many uniqueness that each one of us bring, that looking at a resume and saying who this person is and how this person is going to add value to the organization is something that we really need to think about. I'm with you. I'm liking the way that you're thinking. And I think what for me at the end of it is, when I personally, I was thinking about what do I actually do? Most of the time I get the resume and sometimes I even forget to look at the resume. Like I get so carried into the conversation because we just start by introduction. And I think the resume start off like it's a bootstrap to have the conversation, but rest of it is about the journey of this person. It's rest of it is about the skills of this person. It is about, who they are and what they can accomplish for the organization. So I'm with you. I think we should really focus on killing these resumes. Okay. In terms of the culture fit, see, that is something that I'm so on the fence. Okay. Actually, I wouldn't say I'm on the fence. I think it is very important because of the latest episode that I went through. Okay. I just had to let go somebody in my organization, somebody who was fantastic, who's known in this particular community, who's the author of books. We hired this person, walked into the organization, but the person was not a culture fit. Because the way that we work at Boxes, it's very collaborative. Okay, there is a consensus aspect of it. There's an ownership aspect of it. But coming with that amount of expertise, it basically this person wanted to do a top-down flow of information. Okay, so that's why I think culture fit is very important for me. Basically, it actually sets up the individual for success as well as setting the expectations. So I think I'm going to stay with the culture fit because you want to belong into the family. I cannot bring a stranger into my family. I need to make sure the stranger is what this ecosystem will support him as well as myself. But on the resume, I am seriously thinking about it. I think it's got to go. Okay.
That's awesome. Small wins, remember? Small steps. That's great. Arvi, I cut you off earlier. Jump in.
Yeah, and I just want to, I totally see where you're coming from, and especially given the personal anecdote you just gave about culture fit. I respectfully disagree with both of those things in the sense that I don't think that we should kill the resume. I think that there's great information. Perhaps we should move it to a different part of the interview. So what we do is we have written not only with the resume, but we have 4 or 5 questions that you have to answer about how you would impact Airtable, your journey, et cetera, et cetera. And we read that before looking at your application. And that shows both written communication skills, but it allows us to see the journey. And then we look at your resume and see, okay, like with that added context about who you are, what are the things that you've done and are those skills applicable? to what we're trying to do. So I think in terms of killing the resume, I would, we don't take that stance because I think that there is relevant data there, and there's a reason why resumes have existed for, probably since the Roman era when they were putting it on stone and putting it on people's doorsteps. But I totally see why you would want to get rid of it. And then secondly, on the culture fit piece, I have a problem with the word culture fit. I think I would rather say value fit, culture add. Collaboration is a value rather than culture. I think culture has to do with someone's experience, background, and how that has manifests in the way that they carry themselves and the things that they bring to a team outside of things like collaboration. Whereas collaboration is actually a skill set that has to do with what you value. So, that's what we use at Airtable. We use a culture add interview, and we do values-based hiring. And I think those two things together allow us to both look for folks who fit within our value system, but add to our culture and add things that will allow us to get better as a team. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to stay the same culture. What we want to do is have an evolving culture that's mixed and different and evolving, but the values should be the consistent thread throughout those. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's great. Go ahead, Pramita.
No, I think the value add is right on, because I think that's what the culture fit phase of our interview process is. Basically, what is the value add? How do you align with the values of Box? So I'm right. I think, the value add is the right aspect to talk about in terms of the culture fit instead of the culture fit. But for the resume, I think we do that. The evaluation of the skills is the first phase. That is what the recruiter reaches out. We actually provide them a skill set aspect, a questionnaire that goes out, and candidates actually respond back to it. For me, the resume is, most of the time when I look at the resume, I'm actually validating whether that resume is true. That's where most of the focus is. Oh, talk to me. Oh, you had 2 years over here. What happened over here? Talk to me about this project. I would rather spend, and blame it on Gaurav. He started me on this, okay? I would rather spend on throwing a problem at the board, or, and talk about, what is this potential person thinking? How are they thinking? And what would be the nuances that they can bring to the organization? But rather, when you throw a resume, we sort of go back to the past. We constantly, and sometimes people even ask me like 7 years back, even 2 years back, I don't remember, okay? Then they start talking to me about 7-year project that I did 7 years back. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, how far do we want to go? That's before my kid was born. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's a thing. I think, yes, we have to do a balance, but for some reason, people actually believe more on the LinkedIn rather than the resume, because I think LinkedIn gives some sort of, credibility, because people are a little bit more cautious about, not everybody, but more cautious about what they throw. There are people in their network that sort of add to it. But I'm still on the fence with the recommendations that come on LinkedIn, because it almost looks like somebody actually wrote it up and sent it back to them and said, hey, could you post it for me? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's true. Recommendations, there's a lot of gray there in the recommendations, right? And it's quid pro quo. I'll write you one if you write me one, kind of thing. Yeah. So there's definitely something there. I think there's the one thing that, takes me back some years ago at a previous company. We actually had this debate about the whole culture fit, and it was sort of two sides. One going, no, you absolutely have to fit, or we don't want to hire the person. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Every person that joins this company, regardless whether we're a small company, thousands of employees, or just a few hundred, everyone is going to bring something new to the culture. To your point, Aubrey, I don't think we can say, if you don't fit within my box, we're not going to hire you, or assume that anyone that joins that fits within the box once you've done this culture fit interview is going to be so adherent. Culture is something that continues to evolve. It doesn't stay static, right? And every one of us, any new person coming in is going to have an impact on the culture. Good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter, but they're going to make this continue to morph, and we've got to be open to it. And we've got to actually want it. I think if we stay within, we define a box and put these 4 things, and I sort of see this with a lot of companies where you walk into their office, whenever we get to go back to our offices, there's giant posters everywhere and of the values, and
Mm.
there's pieces put on everyone's desk. There's a little placard, or there's a little plaque, and I'm going, if you have to make it so apparent, I don't think your company actually follows that, right? Like, it shouldn't be in your face. Either you do it or you don't, and it doesn't have to be on every wall and then in the bathrooms and on everyone's desk and everything of those things. I think there's a it's part of your DNA or it's not, and your DNA sort of has to keep evolving as you bring more people in. And yes, they should fit, but they are going to impact it and they're going to make it grow.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So I think that this is great insight, and I really like how we're thinking and challenging what we do and how do we take it next. I think starting small is best. I think we would both agree we have to make small baby steps and then work from there. It's not going to happen all at once. It's not just one person to solve it. We're going to have to focus sort of how do you affect change at your executive level? What about at the team level? What about at the individual level? Where do you start? Where can you affect the change is really important. How do you empower hiring managers and encourage more balance on their teams? And it's not just about, and when they're hiring, they should be thinking about this. This is something that's really part of how am I building my teams? How am I evolving my teams? And not just thinking about it at one time and say, oh, I need to go hire someone. So now I think about this, which is typically when someone comes, knocks on your door and says, have you thought about diversity and inclusion? And so how do we make this truly part of our DNA? But let's open up to the audience. I see a lot of questions were coming in chat, so we'll try and maneuver between chat and QA. And there's some interesting questions, so let's pick a few here. And everyone attending, please feel free to use the Q&A, and we'll start answering those. I'll pick the first one from here. I'm building a team. How do you balance the need for diversity and inclusion with the pressure to get the team formed and producing? And someone else jumped in and said, excellent question, something that is always at top of mind. So how do you balance the two between, you got to fill these recs really fast, and we're in this break things, work fast kind of mode, but balance the need for diversity and inclusion. Any thoughts on that one?
I mean, I just think that you have to really convince your hiring managers and your leadership that diversity is more important than shipping a product for the long-term benefit of the organization. I think that there are two time horizons that you're thinking of. Generally when something is very, very urgent and a team needs to be built to do something, it's probably on a 3-6 month, maybe a year time horizon. But hopefully you're hiring folks who are going to be there for 4 years plus, right? So you need to be able to make as a hiring manager, I think you need to be able to make the case that slowing down just a little bit to be able to intentionally build a diverse team is going to make the team better over those 4 years versus sacrificing that to hit this goal of pushing out or shipping a product in 6 months to a year. And if you're an organization that's thinking long-term, which I believe every organization should be, then that diversity should be prioritized over that piece. And then I think secondly, as you continue to diversify your company and really build the muscle for this, it's going to get easier and easier to find that talent. So it's not, diversity work isn't some sort of like static, always going to be difficult type of thing for your company. It's like any strategy or tactic. As you continue to do it, you will get better. As you continue to bring on more women, people of color, folks from the queer community, disabled folks, the more ingratiated you're going to be in those communities. And you have to trust that, just like with everything else, you can get better at it over time. So I really think it's just about mentally thinking about two different time horizons and being okay with sacrificing a little bit of the short term so that you can have that long-term success building a team that is going to stick around. Like I'll give you an example. When someone leaves your team, it costs you a lot of money, right? It costs you a lot of money. The sacrifice of not having an inclusive environment means that people leave your organization faster. And this is becoming more and more true, especially as Gen Z joins the workforce. They care about diversity, right? So in the future, as folks more and more choose companies and take diversity into an account, it's your job to kind of create an organization that can both bring that talent in and keep them longer for your long-term success, right? So if you do the math on that long-term time horizon versus what you might lose pushing a feature out a month or 2 months because you're looking to build that team that's diverse, I think that it becomes pretty easy to make that sacrifice and start prioritizing diversity over the pressures of building a product. But you need to have the language to do it. And I think that's what I kind of equip our hiring managers with. Like when they go to their director, when they go to their leader and say, hey, I want to build a diverse team. Let's expand the timeline out for when we need to build this and push this out by 2 weeks to a month, possibly more. How do I do it? And basically I coach them on this time horizon mindset, also the changing landscape of talent and what their team might look like once they go from 1 to 4 to even 20, and how investing in diversity might speed that up. Speed that 4 to 20 up moving forward if you invest early.
That's great. Yeah. Versus, hey, I'll deal with it when I'm 20, right?
Exactly.
Or I'm 25, and yeah, then perfect. Yeah, you remind me of we do a survey every year ourselves with developers, and it's called the Tech Report Developer Survey. It's out on HackerRank. It's not gated. You can go view it. We did one. We had about 10,000 Gen Zers participate, and they're all sort of in the tech space, and they're developers. And one of the conclusions we got from it was, as you mentioned, diversity and inclusion high on their priority, and the other one was impact. Like what impact I'm going to make, and that was a higher order bit for them than comp, which was very different from what we saw with previous generations, right? Whether it's Gen X or before. So it was really encouraging to see like how much of a weightage, like exponentially higher to them and saying, don't tell me about comp, don't tell me about benefits. Like when you're approaching them and saying, why should you come join them? Those were the two single biggest things they wanted to know is what impact am I going to make? How meaty is the problem I'm going to solve? And what's the social impact? What's the greater impact going to be of what you do as a company? Right. And that's what attracts me. And then of course, what's the level of diversity in the team, is it group thing, etc. Right. And I was presenting at one of the conferences and I was sharing results of that. And someone caught me at the end of the conference and said, you do realize that Gen Zers, their first mortgage bill hasn't shown up, which is why they don't really care about comp. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's a good joke. And yeah, they'll eventually get there. But the fact that this is how they think from day one, as they're entering the workforce, and they just started entering the workforce last year, I think the long-term impact on us is going to be great. Like they're going to be with us through 2030 while they're still, or some 30 odd years where they're part of this. It's really encouraging to see how they think so radically different than previous generations have, or like, or my generation has when it came to what's important when I'm starting my career. So
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Yes, they're very purposeful. The purpose is very important for them rather than, what is the value out of it. So, but going back to the earlier thing, the hiring managers, we were talking about hiring managers having to do this. I think what it is my ask is the way that we've actually done this transformation from 8 women in tech ops to 23 is because it was very intentional. It was never reactive. It was very proactive. We did a baseline. We looked at the numbers, and the first thing is like for all of us was like, oh my God. And then there was a survey, and we quickly realized in the survey, the women were the most dissatisfied, not so much about the job, what they're doing, but so much about just where they are, who they are being accounted for. Okay. So based on that, with that data point is where we intentionally did this, being proactive about saying, we have to make sure that we actually bring in the diverse candidate for these roles.
That's great. There's one question that's related, and I think you're best suited to start by answering it. How to source more female candidates for engineering and design roles? And this is something the program that you're doing is, exactly targeted to share more about how do you start with sourcing?
I think it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's proactive, I think, and it going to Albury's point, right? The fact that they have somebody actually committed to diversity and inclusion makes a lot of difference. For me, it was very personal. Okay. One is I'm basically a brown skinned woman, a migrant, and then I have a daughter. Okay. So this was basically not so much advocating for myself or building my future. It was basically thinking about what do I want for her? So it has to become a personal journey for each one of us. It cannot just be at the top. It has to be every aspect of who we are. We have to, sort of aligned with that journey. So for me, is once I identified this is what I want to do, I was very intentional. We did demo days with Hackabright, Women with Code. I just went, I'm like, I don't care. I'm just going to reach out. I don't care. And what I did look is, I didn't look for the ideal candidate. What I look for is potential, because in all honesty, women, I wouldn't say women, but the diverse candidates tend to be 4 steps left behind. All they need is one helping hand to pull them forward. Okay, so that's what I look for. I look for the potential. It's not, hey, is this person going to day one going to be a rock star in my organization? No, but in 3 months, what is going to be their value for this organization? In 6 months, in a year, I think that's what I think when we start looking at supporting diverse engineering candidates, that's what we need to look at. It's not, I do not want, when I look at Hackabright, I mentor a few over there. And for me, when I look at them, it is not that they don't have an engineering background. Some of them have not even finished high school, but man, are they bright. They are hungry for something. And that hunger is what is going to push them to the finish line faster than all of us. Okay, so that's how I look at it.
Awesome. Let's take another one around measurement. Aubrey, help us understand. The question is, how can we measure if we are devoting enough bandwidth to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that this is going to sound like a similar answer that I've had before, but it's like measuring any OKR, right? Like just like you measure, whether you are hitting your sales targets or whether you're hitting your, pushing out features on the timeline that you need to, or getting rid of bugs in the way that you need to. I think you need to set up your own, kind of like baseline metrics for saying, hey, this is the goal that we want to hit, and these are the things, the system that we built to make it happen and to measure those things well. I think one of the challenges I've seen in my that even building D&I other companies is that I focused a lot on the end goal of I want to increase diversity on this team by 10% quarter over quarter. I think that is a pretty naive kind of understanding of diversity work. And there are pretty much signals that you need to also measure before then that kind of get to that end result. And you need to build the system first and then put the goal out. The one thing that we did when I got to Airtable about 7 months ago, I said, we're not going to have goals. We're not going to have a target. And the reason why we're not going to have a target is because I want all of our focus to be spent on solving all the figuring out all the signals that we need that will then create a target for us moving forward. So what we focused on was creating first a diversity framework. Why does diversity matter to us? How many times a month are we going to meet about it with hiring managers? What are the things experiments that hiring managers going to commit to do the work? And what are recruiters going to do? And how are we going to measure whether those things are actually happening? So putting those things in place before we set a target was a really great way for us to just really get involved in actually building the system of diversity and inclusion work. And what's happened is what's emerged is that as we've met, every other week, as we've kind of looked at the pipeline of candidates and seen some of the gaps in our hiring, we've made just-in-time adjustments. I remember in early April, we were hiring we were building our AE team in Austin, and we realized that it was all dudes. So we just course corrected, and we said, hey, we have 2 more open recs. Let's make sure that we reach out to as many qualified women as possible. And we ended up with now 3 women on that team and 2 men. And we just totally flipped the script. But that didn't have to do with any target that we had. It's just that we were really, really focused on the system that we were building, which is just looking at the pipeline often, bringing in hiring managers so that they're part of the journey, and starting on the same foot, co-collaborating on the why behind why we're doing this. And, in the future, we will have targets, but those targets will be based off of the system that we've created and the success that we've had thus far. So I think what I've learned over time, and early in my career, I would argue with myself. I'd say, I respectfully disagree. You need to have a target. You need to make sure that you're hitting some sort of top level goal. But I think you have to, with any business or with any startup, you have to do the research and you have to build the system. And the system will tell you what your goal is going to be. And I see a lot of companies and a lot of organizations missing that step. And when they don't hit the target, they get really discouraged. They're like, oh, like we didn't hit the target, back to the drawing board, instead of just looking at, okay, when we went to this conference, how many people did we get in touch with, and how many people did we hire? And can we get better at that next time? So I think that there are leading metrics that you need to put in place that will tell you whether you're putting the time and effort into it, and just be ready to just experiment over time. Because just like with any new function or any new department, it's going to take you a lot of time to figure out what works. And you're going to have to adjust and evolve, and you're not always going to hit the number.
That's brilliant. That's amazing insight, and that's awesome already. Like, yeah, I think all of us would naturally index to it. Let's go set a goal and let's go figure out how to, because that's how we're all wired, right? Everything we do is goal, whether it's a sales target, it's customer health, it's adoption, it's shipping as a sort of an event, and are we shipping on time? All of those are just numbers that we all sort of fixate towards and saying, let's go set a goal. And yeah, goals, that's the good part about numbers, right? You can make it, there's a lot of things that you can do to it. You can contort it any way you want when it comes down to it. But yeah, not starting with let's have this goal, but really digging down into what's our process and sort of letting the goal emerge is super brilliant. I think it's a completely different way of thinking. That's what's needed, right? There's like break the glass and let's start all over again on this one. Cool.
I like the fact you guys were able to pivot once you realized, that it wasn't going the way that it should. Okay. Yeah. That takes a lot of courage.
It does for sure. There's lots of questions, and I'm going to try and get to as many as we can. There's one that's very relevant to now, which is encouraging. So this was because candidates can no longer physically tour the office, see the various teams. Do you find yourself needing to put even more thought into who joins the interview panel? Life is remote now, right? Does that change who you would put on the interview panel? Pravita, have you made any changes, or have you kept everything the same?
I think for me, most of the time that as a hiring manager, if I'm putting myself as a hiring manager, most of my kickoff is having an initial hiring manager talk, with the candidate. For me, one aspect is I look for, as I did mention, that what is their potential, where are they coming from, and what do they want in this organization? Why are they even moving? Why do they want to be part of the organization? Am I going to be able to fulfill their needs? Okay. Once I identify who they are, my panel keeps morphing. I look at this person and I try to identify, who would be the right fit to actually have a relevant conversation with them. One aspect for me is basically me to identify the candidate. I also want to give a good experience for the candidate, because this is something I do not want to kill, even if they did not get the job. For me, is usually irony is basically people who come through my interview process, even if I say no to them, they go and connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm like, oh, okay. So now what do I do with them? Okay. So, but for me the hiring panel morphs. You have to be. It is not. You shouldn't set a panel based on the role. To some extent, you want the subject matter to be talking to the candidate, but you also want the rest of the stakeholders, everybody on the panel should be morphing. With the virtual aspect, I don't think it has changed much, because it has always been, for me, is like, where is this candidate coming from? Who's going to be the right person to provide the experience for the candidate? So, yeah.
And just to jump in there, I agree with everything that you just said, Paritha. And I think one benefit that you have is that you are a brown woman of color who is starting the interview process.
I know. I'm maximizing on that. Oh, yeah, I am maximizing. Right? Previously, it would have been a different thing. And now I'm like, you know what? This is who I am, and I'm going to work on this. I'm going to showcase this. Yes.
Exactly. So diversity is a strength, right? It's just something that's not even something that you have to really think about, because you're already representing it. And I think one other thing I would add to that is I think that we've had several candidates, go through a process, really enjoy Airtable, but say, hey, there wasn't any diversity on my interview panel. And what they've done is say, like, they want to talk to me. They want to talk to the diversity lead and say, hey, what's going on? Why did that happen? And what are you going to do to fix it? And what are the things that you're doing to promote diversity at Airtable? So I just want to say that candidates care about it, especially underrepresented folks. And the one interesting thing that I think we're doing on top of adding more diversity to our interview panels is when you don't have someone like a Pabitha to just, already kind of be that stakeholder, sometimes you can put underrepresented folks on panels and overburden them with interviews. And we don't want to do that. We don't have a lot of women on our engineering team. We're really trying to figure out a way to balance those two things. And the way that we've done it is we've made sure that every man and every male identifying person also is very invested in understanding of our D&I goals, and they proactively bring it up in the interview. They talk about how much they want diversity, how much they love diversity, how much really their personal story about why diversity matters. And I think that that doesn't replace having diversity on the panel, but it does help bolster and mitigate so that someone who doesn't have diversity on their panel can say, oh, well, everyone here obviously cares about it. So, of course, I'm going to be a little bit more comfortable taking that offer should I get through the interview. So I think it's in a both and. Like, you need to have diversity, but you can't just contain the diversity to the underrepresented people. You need to also expand that to the team and train them on, hey, this is why we care about it. This is why you care about it. Proactively talk about it in the interview so that people know that we're authentic across the team rather than just the folks who are underrepresented who are talking to you about it.
That's awesome. It's great. I think we have time for one quick question, and then we're coming up to the hour. We're respectful of everyone's time. The most upvoted question in the Q&A panel, at least, was what single action have you taken that has made the most impact to either diversity or inclusion? What's the one key takeaway? What's the one thing you want everyone to leave here today with? Just one. Pick one.
If I would say, if your company doesn't have someone who is hired to do this work, this is the best time to do it. There are a lot of diversity and inclusion folks on the market right now. I think it's become, over the last 6 years, it went from kind of a research project to an actual function that has goals and things that we and value add. So I would just start exploring, how can you hire someone to come in and do this and think about this? Because I think it's the best thing that you can do right now that'll create long-term results.
Awesome.
I think for myself, it's basically, diversity is it's relatively easier because it's a number, okay? But the inclusion is what I'm struggled with. How do you understand this? Because, for me, I would say, women of color, I have a language barrier, I have some strange words that I pronounce a strange way. The belonging aspect, I know we talk about this. This is something that I struggled with, very transparently. This is something I struggle with every single time you go in there, I know I look around, okay, maybe 4 women at the table, but do I really feel like I belong here, with the rest of the 35 men on the table, so I think we need to focus. It is a good start, diversity, the numbers are the good start, but we need to start focusing about the actual inclusion, how engaged are the diverse folks within the organization. I think that's where we need to focus, because else we will lose the people that we have brought to the table. Okay, so.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's awesome. Look, I can spend the next couple of hours with both of you and say, this is what we're going to do all day is talk about this. There's some great questions that came from the attendees. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. This has been super awesome learning for me. There's a bunch of things that I want to start doing right away. So I'm going to be sitting down with my HR team and say, hey, let's make this happen. So that's been really great. And I'm sure it has been a great learning experience for everyone. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your insights, taking the time and the effort to be here. And like I said, love to spend at least several more hours with each of you to dig deeper into some of these things. And to the audience as well, I hope we had more time. And if there's an opportunity for us to engage with you, answer your questions more, we'll figure out a way. But I'll hand over to Mustafa.